The other thing that I would just say is, as we're getting upon the 250th anniversary of the Declaration and our founding, is to understand that the flourishing of the individual and the respect for individual rights, including the free exercise of religion, advances the common good. That was a principle upon which our country was founded.
Welcome to the Napa Legal Podcast, where we discuss religious liberty, particularly from the perspective of faith-based nonprofit organizations. I'm Frank DeVito, Senior Counsel and Director of Content at Napa Legal.
I'm Joseph Clement, Content and Program Manager at Napa Legal.
And we are joined for this special episode by a good friend of Napa Legal, Andrea Picciotti-Bayer. So I could do the introduction a lot of different ways. First of all, Andrea, thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, it's great to be with you guys. I do consider you friends, and I love all that you're doing at Napa Legal.
Oh, thank you. I remember, I think I had worked at Napa Legal for about a week, and I came and you were a keynote for the retreat that we were doing, and I sat down next to you, and we started to chat. So we were friends from the very beginning of my Napa Legal journey, and it's good to finally have you on here. Thank you.
No, it's great.
So for our listeners who do not know about Andrea's work, I think that's probably very few, honestly, given our audience. But Andrea is director of the Conscience Project. She's a Stanford-educated lawyer, has worked at DOJ, done civil rights work for a long time, has gotten numerous awards, is published pretty much everywhere. But my favorite way to actually describe your bio is you have the best Twitter X byline on the website. It says, "Mom of 10, friend to the fabulous, and defender of the good, true, and beautiful." It's the best bio I think I've ever seen online. So I think we can just wrap the intro there. And I think before we go into some of the First Amendment issues, religious issues that we want to discuss today, just wanted to ask you a little bit, however much you want to tell us about yourself, your work, any way you'd like to take that intro question.
Yeah, no, thanks again for having me on. It's exciting. It's a great time to be in the religious freedom sphere right now here, domestically and internationally. I mean, we know that this issue, especially for the persecuted globally, is hot, and to be able to contribute with insight and hopefully with expertise to help average people of faith kind of understand and orient is just an honor for me. As Frank, you mentioned, I've been, since graduating law school, very much interested in civil rights. When I was at the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, I had the chance to work in the appellate section in some of the early Bible study cases, which is, after school Bible study cases. And that was a great chance to kind of marry my kind of desire to be a faithful Catholic with my professional direction. And, one of the greatest benefits to my professional life has been my family and taking time out of my legal work to raise kind of a large brood. We were in South America in the beautiful country of Colombia, and to come back about 9 years ago with 10 kids. And the insight that I think a lot of moms bring when we onboard back into public life, and I see things now that I don't think my 20-year-old self saw, and I also see the importance of faith, especially living in a predominantly Catholic country, probably a 99% Christian country, and just how faith really kind of infuses the culture, and to come back to the United States and see a little bit of that slipping away, but that the law still respects both when we worship and exercise our faith individually, but also when we come together collectively, whether it's as supporting nonprofits within nonprofits, but responding to the needy and the vulnerable around us is kind of what we're called to do, in addition to this great task of evangelizing. So it's been wonderful, and leading the Conscience Project, being the director, being able to contribute amicus briefs in key religious freedom cases in the courts of appeals and in the Supreme Court is just an exciting time, especially to bring the voice of people who are affected by these key cases. Most of what I've been doing recently are what's kind of called story briefs, where regular people of faith are able to share how this case impacts their life, their ability to worship, their ability to live out their faith in their work or in the schools that they want to send their kids to, and not be treated as second-class citizens. And although I'm a great originalist when it comes to interpreting the Constitution, I do recognize that we live also in a world where it's important that we understand the significance of these cases. The founders understood it, and we should too. So we can't think about the impact of these key important conflicts without thinking about the people to which it matters.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Before we dive into some of these cases, just wanted to highlight that because I think often originalism we can get confused about the role of the different people involved in a case, right? Like the judge's job is to interpret what the law is, but the lawyers, the amici and all of them, the job is to advocate for what is the right side, right? Hopefully, but part of that involves storytelling. It's not just what are the dictionary definitions in the 18th century of this term, but yeah, the real impact that these precedents will have is worth telling. It should be part of the advocacy, I think.
No, I agree. And I also think, we're seeing more and more significance of judicial opinions on culture and everyday life. And so we're also aware, and I'm keenly aware, that we're dealing with a court of public opinion. And one of the reasons why we started the Conscience Project was because people said, people just aren't that interested in religious freedom. And I add, until their religious freedom is infringed upon. And so it's really kind of our responsibility as believers to talk about why our faith matters and why, if we're excluded from civil society or treated as second-class citizens, that's harmful not just to our religious interests, but to society. And so getting that story out there, that truth out there, is really an important way to make people care about the First Amendment, for example.
Right. No, it's a great service you're doing for the cause. I know Joseph has all kinds of questions to start to jump into some of these areas of jurisprudence and case law. So, Joseph, why don't you take it away here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking of talking about the story of religious liberty in America, we love to start off by talking about just kind of where broadly we are with the religious liberty movement. In the last 10 years or so, we've seen really through the Carson v. Macon line of cases, Trinity Espinoza, um, that the Supreme Court has time and time again said that a government cannot exclude religious organizations and individuals from public benefits solely because of their faith. So we've seen some progress on the inclusion of religion in the public life. And we know you've done a lot of work on the flip side of that. So we'd love to hear a little bit about where we are with the freedom from government coercion and censorship or pressure to abandon religious beliefs.
That's a great question, Joseph. I almost think that they go hand in hand, right? Because we don't think about the need to be included unless we're being excluded, right? And the cases that you mentioned, Trinity Lutheran, Carson v. Macon, Espinosa, those were all instances in which people of faith or religious schools or religious, churches were being, were trying to benefit from government benefits on equal footing, and they were told they couldn't. Right, either because of a Blaine Amendment or kind of a modification of a Blaine Amendment, which we know has such anti-Catholic bigotry at its roots. But this was kind of bubbling up again, where religious organizations and individuals were being told, this is something that you just can't participate in. And at the point, because of your religion, or because of your religious identity, or because you are doing things that are religious, in addition to doing things that the grant will offer, like playgrounds, that sort of thing. So moving on to the next phase or the next wave, I think is where we are right now, right? Excluding people because of their religious identity or groups because of their religious identity is clearly a violation of the Constitution. But what if they're being excluded not because they're explicitly Catholic, but because they hold true to Catholic teaching? And that's kind of, Trinity Lutheran 2.0, let's say. We saw a bit of it in Sharon L. Fulton versus City of Philadelphia. And for people that may not remember the case, it was the case of The Catholic Social Services in the city of Philadelphia, longtime foster care placement agency, along with longtime foster parents, were told that they couldn't continue to place children in loving homes because of the Catholic Church commitment and position on traditional marriage as between a man and a woman. Um, that case was a victory for the city of Philadelphia, and I will never rain on the Fulton Parade of being a victory, but it didn't quite get at the issue that is now before the courts in several cases, which is, can you exclude groups because of their fidelity to traditional Christian teaching, whether it's on marriage, the human person, sexual identity, using as a weapon anti-discrimination laws that include sexual orientation and gender identity. And that's really where I think that we are right now. Fortunately, the cases that the Supreme Court has so clearly identified, that trio of cases is going to be key for that second generation of free exercise challenges, especially when we're dealing with cases dealing with children. Education is a big issue where school choice is popping up in a very beautiful and important way. And parents are being told, yes, you can access resources to be able to choose alternatives to your public school, but those alternatives can't include religious schools or can include schools that are consistent with their religious identity. So really, the pressure is coming from within, telling Catholic schools, Christian schools, you can be part of a universal preschool program, for example, in Colorado, so long as you're not Catholic. And to their credit, these faith-based organizations are saying we cannot operate that way. We can't betray our mission in order to, serve people because that kind of undermines the whole reason why we exist.
Yeah, so I always love when the full fact pattern comes up because, like you mentioned, I think it's a great example of why this kind of nominally anti-discrimination, but why that sort of regime can be so harmful, and how it shows that in a lot of these spheres, like in childcare and foster care, that religious organizations oftentimes are the one doing crucial work, and enforcing them out doesn't really help anybody. It eliminates an entire swath of people that are helping solve these big societal problems.
Well, and that's the irony, right? There's so many ironies in the fire when it comes to religious liberty at work. But one of the ironies is the argument is we want to be able to provide greater inclusivity, so we're going to exclude faith-based groups in order to do that. And to their credit, some of the leaders in this group, particularly Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty and Alliance Defending Freedom, have really talked about that this isn't by standing up for the religious teaching of their organizations. They're not insisting that other organizations don't attend to other people. They're just trying to be consistent and coherent. And so it's not kind of going out there and saying that a gay couple can't foster, but that we are not going to facilitate the placement of a child into a home run by two parents of the same sex. So it's not closing doors. It's more saying leave our doors open so that more people can find the right fit. And that applies in the school choice case as well, which is great. As parents, all of us, and for those people that are listening that are parents, school choice isn't about abandoning the public schools. I think it was Governor Brownback who said it best. It's about basically creating more opportunities, and that actually benefits the public schools so that they can be able to serve their students with greater supports and greater resources as well.
Yeah. There are so many directions I could take this. I think one of the so you have this interesting tension, right? Where in some of these services, some of these things where there's been greater and greater government participation, like the schools is a good example, right? Early on in our country's history, there really were no public schools, so it was mostly an endeavor by local institutions, and then it grew. But it's interesting because you maybe have this tension between government run and like religious run or just generally privately run organizations. But there are some, to Joseph's point, where it's not it's so nonsensical to exclude the religious organizations because there aren't even enough alternatives, and the foster one is what really kills me. So, I was a children and youth solicitor for a government agency for a couple years before I was at Napa Legal, and my goodness, is there a shortage of foster parents? I mean, it's so bad that, you have, uh, kids who you end up having to put in group homes, having to put in really not ideal placements because they have no parents, able to take care of them, and so to exclude people for like their beliefs on sexuality or their Christian identity is really just it's particularly shocking to the conscience, even above a lot of these other institutional tensions, at least the way I look at it, because there's just such a need for this, for religious individuals to be involved in this.
Yeah, no, going back to the issue of the importance of stories, because especially when we're talking about the foster care and adoption context, it's very easy to think about numbers and a lack of placements when you start realizing that this is about real children,
Yes.
oftentimes siblings, and trying to place siblings together. It's usually the faith based groups and the faith based foster parents that are willing to take on what is a really heroic and weighty burden. And it's because of their faith that they can do that. And they've time and time again spoken about having that kind of supernatural vision, as well as the support that you find within the church, within not only the Catholic Church but our other Christian denominations that support churches and support families
Mm.
that are fostering and adopting. So it is a really this is a great time in which we can say, we've been in the foster care business before the government got in, right? I mean,
Right.
St. Joseph is a perfect example of, being in the foster care business before government got involved. We do it well, we do it efficiently, and without faith, it's not done as well.
Yeah.
And sharing some stories. There's a great family that I know out of the state of Minnesota, who they've been fostering, and now they've recently adopted three sisters. One sister was definitely confused on issues of gender, and they were going to split the sisters up. And these are girls that suffered unimaginable abuse at the hands of their biological parents, and were really stabilizing because of two very heroic Christian parents. Um, it was only by virtue of a private treating psychiatrist who stepped in and said, "This is not in the interest of the children," to put the gender confusion of one over the good of three. Since then, these girls have been adopted. The girls are doing great. The one that was kind of most dabbling with issues of gender identity has now found community and support within her Christian school. And what we've learned on gender issues is a lot of kids just need time to work through these confusions. And it was because these parents just loved them through it. And I can't, I tip my hat at them because they've just done an amazing job. And if they were excluded, it would have just been a tragic loss in the lives of these beautiful girls.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Um, so I want to. I mean, it's not much of a pivot. I think this is a natural next step in the First Amendment discussion here. So you had written in one of the pieces that we had read recently, about it's clear that the Constitution doesn't require hostility towards religion. Yet that's not what you would see if you looked at the history of how I think both courts since like maybe the 1940s and also just the common person thinks about the Establishment Clause and the whole wall of separation between church and state confusion. And so, I mean, I won't get too far onto a soapbox here because this is one of the issues that really like fires me up, right? Of course, the Establishment Clause, it's not a blanket prohibition against government supporting religion or religious citizens at all. It means something very particular. I mean, at the founding, it meant something very, very particular. It was only about preventing an established federal church, and there were indeed established state churches. So, but that aside, this idea that the Establishment Clause means government can't touch religion, like cannot, can't fund it, can't support it, can't look like it's allowing it in the public square. That seems to be where at least culturally, if not legally, maybe a little of both. And over the last like century, we've moved. I've seen some signs of hope that we've kind of started to claw this back. But I guess I'll leave that as an open ended. Where are we with the establishment clause? Where should it be? What's going on here?
Yeah, I think we're right in the mix of it all, right? And the most important thing is, and we mentioned this before, the role of originalism is kind of giving greater clarity to what the religion clauses mean. Um, First off, most recently, but it was leading up for a while there, was the evolution of our understanding of the Establishment Clause and basically bearing lemon for good. And that really came clear recently in Kennedy versus Bremerton School District, right? The praying coach case, which was a free exercise case of all things, that we get greater clarity on what the Establishment Clause is. The school district thought that they had to fire or wouldn't permit a public school football coach to pray after games because allowing him to pray after games would be a violation of the Establishment Clause. And the Supreme Court said, no, 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 no. Actually, barring him from using his private time to pray is a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. And let's explain a little bit while we're at it what the Establishment Clause means. We're abrogating, and it's only lawyers that would appreciate that word. I try not to use it in any of my writing, but we're getting rid of lemon. Right? Lemon was unworkable. It was used as a weapon
Yeah.
against religion. Anytime religion kind of was around the public square. And so the Supreme Court said, no, 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 this is not at all what the Establishment Clause provides. It's much more a check on government than it's a check on religion. And where the development I see is going to get us to is where are the cases where religion can start appearing in the public square. We've got, curiously enough, a president that's not particularly religious is probably one of the most pro-religion administrations, especially this second go around where religion is being talked about. We've got a presidential commission on religious liberty, and it's foreign, right? Because we've been sold a bill of goods that somehow religion needs to be excluded. Again, I'll give a shout out to Beckett Law, who calls it a shag carpet understanding of the Establishment Clause, because it's from the 70s, decision making 70s and the 80s, where it's a misunderstanding that makes the government hostile to the presence of religion. What are they going to be the cases? Well, we've got some cases dealing with laws mandating the display of the Ten Commandments in public schools classrooms out of Texas and Louisiana. Arkansas is another state, but their case is a little bit farther behind in as far as kind of the judicial review of things. And it's looking at whether there's an Establishment Clause problem with a passive display of the Ten Commandments on public school classrooms. I personally don't think there's a problem, especially because there isn't a free exercise problem in that these displays are only passive displays. The states don't require teachers to teach on them. Students aren't required to recite them. There's no test at the end of the day to figure out what's the fifth commandment. So there's no element of coercion. Instead, it's kind of one of the many posters that you'll find in a public school classroom or in a public school in general. And given not just the historical significance of the Ten Commandments, but its religious significance, it can be there for students to ponder. And again, it's not saying that state lawmakers need to pass these laws, but if they choose to, the establishment doesn't prevent them from doing so.
I think I just wanted to touch on one historical thing because I did especially when the St. Isidore case was ramping up, I was reading into the history of public schools. And I just find it really interesting that something like posting this kind of mutually agreed upon by different religions, 10 commandments in a school is like a one, and this is like a big deal. I feel like there were sevens and eights that were like quite normal. Like the original public schools they weren't sectarian, but they were basically like non-denominationally Protestant responses to the boom of Catholic schools. So they're teaching out of the King James Bible, they're reciting the Our Father in class. So it's just kind of fascinating, 170 years later to see a claim that putting the 10 commandments on the wall of a public school is an establishment clause violation is just how far we've come. It's a different world.
Well, and it's an interesting time. I think the originalists on the court are really fleshing out the idea of the role of history and tradition. And we can look at the founders themselves as invoking God. Thomas Jefferson, who's held up as the great, kind of doomsdayer over building this separation of church and state, actually invoked God in his inaugural addresses. He allowed for religious exercise, and worship in government buildings. So even though he wasn't the most religious of the founders, or his religion was a little quirky, he too recognized the role of religion in public life. And without, obviously our system of public education is newer than the founding. But if we look at education in general, at the time of the founding, readers included the Ten Commandments, readers included catechism, basic catechisms, and the expectation was that religion was part of the education of a child. And we can separate out, religious instruction, but the exclusion of religion entirely would be, not consistent with what the people at the time of the founding generation thought about. And it's actually a disservice to children and to society in general.
Yes, we've talked a lot about why it's so important, not only legally but also practically, for religious people to have a spot at the table in public life. I'd love to take a minute to address what's kind of a common pushback against this, and it's this concept of the so-called freedom from religion movement. People might say, "Oh, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to things that might be religious." What would you say to somebody who kind of has that kind of mindset?
I think you've got the power of the vote, right? I mean, we live in a vibrant, democratic society where you can get involved and on both occasions and say, I really think that we should be promoting general kindness more in our public schools, or I think that we should be, promoting the Ten Commandments. That's the exciting part of our American system. And so it's not about, your taxpayer money. I mean, we're putting things into the common good, but I think it's the details and the nuance, and I think that we can see time and time again from the perspective of people of faith the benefit that religion gives, but there isn't like a veto that the Constitution gives to people who don't want religion in. Instead, it's an opportunity to make your case. And you're going to find that there are going to be states like Texas and Louisiana that want displays of the Ten Commandments. It probably is going to be not the case in California. And some of that is the nature of kind of the robust exchange of ideas that we allow for, and really understanding the role of the Constitution in this. We want that exchange of ideas. What we don't want is censorship or suppression of ideas only because they have a religious character.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I like what you brought up there in passing about the common good because I think it's a really important example when people say something, "Oh, I don't want my tax dollars going to religious schools or whatever because I'm not religious or I don't like that." So I guess I would kind of respond with, listen, if I don't drive, my tax dollars are still going to pay to keep the highways clear. Like if I don't have any kids, my tax dollars are still going to go to the schools. And well, I might bracket the schools because I don't know how good the public schools are for the common good in their current form. But that aside, right? Like you're right. This is not about like my individual preferences and my individual tax dollars. The idea is society collects taxes and there are certain things that we have public for the common good. So this really gets to a foundational question where we get beyond like libertarian preferences and have to say, well, we believe that religion is part of the common good. Like having,
Right.
religious opportunities and allowing religious people to be like part of society. This is good for society, not just for the religious people, but for everyone.
Well, and it's not just religious people who can make that claim, right? And that's the role of people of faith, is to explain to people who aren't particularly tied or tethered to a specific religious community or denomination, and be able to say, not only this is important to me, and this is a big part of my life, and so your respect of that is important because we're living together, but also be able to show how, the Little Sisters of the Poor are a perfect example of, they're not serving only Catholics, they're serving the elderly poor. And we can all agree that there are many people who are poor, who are elderly, and the care that they give is good. The other thing that I would just say is, as we're getting upon the 250th anniversary of the Declaration and our founding, is to understand that the flourishing of the individual and the respect for individual rights, including the free exercise of religion, advances the common good. That was a principle upon which our country was founded, and so we need to really be able to kind of hammer that in, that it's not at odds, but it allows for, when individuals flourish, it allows for the common good. So it's not taking away from some sort of collective good, but it really does supplement and amplify when people can live according to their beliefs.
Well, we were going to close by asking, what do you see as the biggest threats or the biggest things to watch in the religious liberty today? But you already kind of touched on it at the beginning when you talked about us being in the middle of some pretty important developments and the 2.0 that is coming. So can we close by maybe talking a little bit about that specifically? Like, where do you think we're headed? What are some of the big issues to watch in the coming years?
Yeah, I think that we're going to see a clarification by the Supreme Court, hopefully, on the Establishment Clause, continuing to develop that jurisprudence to understand that religion does have a place in public life. It has a place in our own lives as public citizens, but it also can have a place. We're also going to see a development on the Free Exercise Clause. I do think that a number of justices have indicated that, Smith versus Employment Division versus Smith was a good attempt, but it hasn't worked out. And so we've got to find a way to make sure that anti-discrimination laws can't be used as a weapon against faith. But back to kind of your original question, I think the biggest challenge that we face is that less people are identifying as religious, even though those who identify as religion are identifying kind of more closely with their faith than ever before. And so it's really going to be on us, and to basically evangelize and to show why faith matters. And for those of your listeners that are working or running nonprofits, to really be insistent on coherence. Some of the greatest lessons on the Catholic faith have come from groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor, who use the opportunity to talk about the coherence between their mission and their beliefs, to teach about contraception.
Yeah.
And this is a great opportunity. God is always going to give us opportunities. And if we're embattled in a legal fight, it's a chance to explain why we're not willing to abandon the truths that we hold dear to. And so I think that that's going to be, while we have a more and more favorable judiciary, it's going to be up to us to stand up and to speak truth.
That's a great point because it would be easy to just like pick an area of like the church autonomy doctrine coming up against non-discrimination law. What's the next big issue? But I think you make a really important cultural point that as fewer people identify as seriously religious, there's going to be an important messaging element, like you said, almost an evangelizing
Yeah.
effort to make sure that we show society the importance of religious freedom and religious practice when not everybody does it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. This is our, I think I was telling someone, this is our Catholic moment.
Yeah.
This really is, which is a great honor. It's a great blessing to be part of it. I'm so supportive of what you guys are doing. I find that you're giving the tools and the supports that the folks on the front lines need. And I'm, at your beck and call. If you ever need anything, and if any of your listeners do too, just know that my prayers and my work are hopefully in support of all that you're doing. And if it's not, please let me know.
Well, no, we're greatly appreciative of your support and of all the good work you're doing. I think you probably have this same feeling of gratitude pretty often that we do when I stop. And I know so many friends and family and people who struggle with,
Yeah.
jobs that they don't really like because they have to support their families and to like do the things that we get to do for a living. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Amen.
Happy to be in the fight and happy to have you with us. Right. Well, with that, we just sorry, any last parting words from either Joseph or Andrea before I wrap us up?
I don't know if there's anything else, Joseph, that you'd like to ask. I mean, I think that we've covered so much ground. I would say, if you're not already engaged in it, I was leading a field trip to the Supreme Court yesterday with some of my with one of my high schoolers, and I think that we're at a time in which the average American really can be more informed than ever before, whether it's listening to oral arguments while they're being presented. You don't have to wait in line and hope that you can get a seat inside the court, but you can actually, from the comfort of your home, listen to them either while they're happening or afterwards, to be engaged. And I do think that it's not just the advocates who have this
Mhm.
responsibility. I think each and every person of faith, especially in America, needs to be more informed than they've ever been before. But fortunately, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to close for myself, I loved your emphasis on using these challenges we're facing as an opportunity for evangelization, right? Not saying, with the little sister's case, not backing off at all from the consistency of their beliefs, but saying, we know we're going to take these shots, but we're going to stay true to what we believe and stay true to the gospel. So thank you so much for coming on to share your wisdom and to talk about some of these issues.
And thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah, and thank you, Andrea, and thank you to our listeners. As always, we appreciate you joining us here at the Napa Legal Podcast. We always appreciate it if you like and subscribe on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you're listening from. And if you want to support the work that we're doing or find out what we're up to, you can always check us out and support us at napalegalinstitute.org. So we will talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us, and God bless you.